Good afternoon. My name is this on? Is it? Yeah. My name is David Jacobson. I'm the director of the program in Judaic Studies here at Brown. This semester, the program in Judaic Studies is hosting two scholars in fields related to Israel studies. Our increase in programming in this area is designed to fulfill our commitment to contribute constructively to the ongoing discourse about the complexities of current events in the Middle East. Be on the lookout for our second speaker of this semester, Masua Sagiv, who is of the University of California, Berkeley, who will be here in the first week in April. We'll be doing some advertising very soon, and she will be talking about various other aspects of Israel studies. I'm looking forward to that visit as well. I now would like to call upon my colleague, Professor Omri Elmaleh, who will introduce our speaker.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to this evening lecture, Jewish Migrants to Israel from Muslim Countries and the Shaping of Israeli Identity. We are honored to host this event under the auspices of Brown University's program in Judaic Studies. I would like to take this moment and thank Professor David Jacobson, the director of the program, and more importantly, Susan Rothenberg, the almighty manager of the program. Thank you so much for organizing this event. And this evening, we have the privilege of delving deeper into these historical narratives and their lasting impact on the Israeli identity. This lecture, I think, knowing Dr. Moreno, offers the opportunity to examine the migration of Jews from Muslim-majority countries to Israel through a lens that challenges conventional narrative and enriches our understanding of the Israeli society. I think there are few scholars worldwide who possess the depth of expertise necessary to navigate the complexities and far-reaching implication of this migration, and our distinguished guest here is among them. Aviad Moreno is a faculty member at the Ben-Gurion Research Institute at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. He has held fellowship at Tel Aviv University, University of Michigan, and the University of Pennsylvania. His research focuses on Jews in the Middle East and North Africa and their migrations, with an emphasis on Morocco. His scholarship includes the recently published book, Entwined Homelands, Empowered Diasporas, Hispanic Moroccan Jews and Their Globalizing Community, which, by the way, was awarded a National Jewish Book Award in 2025. Actually, he's going to be participating at the ceremony in 2 days from now, so that's a coincidence, or no, I don't believe in coincidence. If we're talking about coincidence, just this morning, Aviad's book was featured in the Times of Israel daily newspaper, where it received high praise for its contribution to this field of study. Another book was a co-edited volume entitled "The Long History of Mizrahim: New Direction in the Study of Jews from Islamic Countries." And the forthcoming anthology in Arabic on Jewish migration from Muslim countries from perspective grounded in global history. Thank you all for joining us for what promises to be a thought-provoking lecture, followed by a Q&A session and discussion. With no further ado, Aviad, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Omri, for your very kind presentation. Thank you, Professor Jacobson, for your kind invitation and for the opportunity to present here at Brown. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Susan, for taking care of the administration. I'm really grateful to be here, and we're looking forward to engaging with you. In my lecture today, I won't be talking about my book, none of my recent publications. Instead, I want to focus on instead of a single study confined to a specific time and place as I usually do, I will take a different approach, and I'll be sharing some eclectic observations on how migration from Muslim countries has shaped Israeli society over the past 76, 77 years, approaching the 77th anniversary. The definition I used for my talk, with the advice of Professor Jacobson, Jewish migrants to Israel from Muslim countries, isn't the most commonly used, you should know this, term or terminology in Israel to describe these communities in post-migration Israel. Most Israelis would use or use another term, more popularized term. What is it? Mizrahim, of course. And here's just a bunch of, yeah, you can see this, academic books on the topic that came out, including one that I had the pleasure of, collaborating with other scholars on, Historia Aruka shel HaMizrahim, the long history of Mizrahim, long history of Mizrahim. Now, what exactly does Mizrahim mean? I'm sure you came across this term, but I will try to, tailor it for a broader audience. So I might ask some, very trivial questions. What does Mizrahim mean, actually? Okay, so it denotes Oriental, people who hailed from the East, of course, immigrated to Israel from the East, yet in the academic and public discourse in Israel and beyond, it reflects a much broader experience shared by the migration circumstances, class identity, class, race, religion, religious traditions, even political identity that are associated with Jews from the Muslim world. Now, let me provide some historical background on what I'm talking about, on the immigration of Mizrahim or Mizrahi Jews or Jews from Muslim countries to Israel, okay? Just to provide some context. So during the mid-20th century, amid decolonization, the rise of new nation states across the MENA region, the Middle East and North African region, nearly 70% of Jewish inhabitants in those countries, in the Arab and, more broadly speaking, the Muslim world, immigrated. And by the turn of the century, the number has risen to almost 97%. About 2/3 of the Jews who immigrated from those countries migrated to Israel, to the newly found Israel Jewish state, and consequently, Israel's demography or demographic landscape shifted dramatically, while until 1948, most early immigrants, Zionist immigrants, came from Eastern Europe. By the late 1960s, the majority of Israel's Jewish population originated predominantly from the Middle East and North Africa, aside from Israel, meaning Muslim majority countries. By the way, despite the arrival of about over 1 million, some people say, if you count the turn of the century, the earlier 21st century, over 1.5 million immigrants from the former Soviet Union, starting from the fall of the Berlin Wall, right, in the 90s, this demographic balance remained relatively stable, as you can see here from recent figures. This was likely due to the larger household size among Mizrahim and their descendants, the tendency of Mizrahim from the former, immigrants from the former USSR to leave Israel after the immigration to Israel. According to some accounts or figures, records I came across, almost a quarter, 25% of those who immigrated from the former Soviet Union eventually left the country. And this is not something that was that common, or there wasn't a similar tendency among Mizrahim. Another very important factor here that most immigrants who came from the former Soviet Union from east of the Ural Mountains in Central Asia were not really classified as Mizrahim in the Israeli Bureau of Statistics record. They were considered to be Asian because they came from Asia, and they were sometimes, counted, classified as part of those coming from Asia and Africa, thereby also considered to be Mizrahim, even though that wasn't the first, choice. If you ask them what your identity, they became Mizrahim, and I'll explain later what it means. but they did not come with this identity from their place of origin. Now, to fully grasp this demographic reality, we must also consider the broader context of Jewish migration at the time, actually starting from the 19th century. While Jewish migration to Israel is often framed as a collective movement of Jews driven by Zionist aspiration, you all know that the reality is that most Jews from regions outside of Asia and Africa, from where most Mizrahim hailed, as I mentioned, consistently remained or later migrated to the Western world, right? Rather than to Israel. Obviously, this is true to American Jews, as you all know. Less than 1% of American Jews immigrated to Israel. But the trend included also East European Jews, who formed the largest and then the second largest Jewish immigrant or Jewish social group, ethnic group in Israel from the 60s. Now, while historically Ashkenazi Jews, including those who eventually migrated to the Americas and West Europe from the 19th century, significantly outnumbered Jews from Asia and Africa, Israel very rapidly, as I mentioned, developed a unique population balance between those sections, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi Jews, compared to the broader Jewish world. Now, another unique point or uniqueness, and perhaps an irony, if you look at it, is that among the so-called European Ashkenazi Jews in Israel, the majority did not come from Western countries, but rather from Eastern European countries, such as the USSR, Romania, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria. Obviously, there were also Sephardi communities there, but many of them are also Ashkenazim, who were deemed themselves historically Ostjuden, right, Oriental. And thereby they were actually also Mizrahim in a way, right? And this is something that is actually being addressed. The irony is being addressed by many scholars in Jewish studies, even broader, historiographies, like Aviad Kleinberg, who is just a general history, right? Historical generalim. So many scholars have highlighted this irony that the very people labeled Easterners in the Israeli context, the Mizrahim, as I mentioned, actually came from region geographically located west of Israel. And that's not just like a geographical, issue. It's something that reflects their identity, particularly Moroccan Jews who, for centuries, even after their migration to Israel, and I remind you, they formed the largest country of origin group in Israel. They identified as Westerners, Maghribi, al-Maghrib al-Aqsa. They were coming from the Maghrib. Okay, and the Israeli made label Mizrahim, as this argument continues, as you can see here, practically erased historical distinct identities such as Sephardim, which is a broader umbrella term with deeper religious and cultural meaning, or even regional differences between Damascus Jews and Aleppo Jews, Adani Jews and San'ani Jews, Spanish-speaking Jews in northern Morocco and Tamazigh Berber-speaking Jews in southern Morocco, in the Sousse, for instance. Many particularities, diversity that were completely erased by this specific social category that completely erased not just historical identities, but ongoing identities that continued well into the 21st century when people, from those countries continue to immigrate, not just to Israel, but to many other locations. In other words, this approach methodologically isolates Israel and Israeli sociology from broader Jewish history, treating it as an independent national case to be examined against the backdrop of other immigrant-absorbing countries in the 20th century, rather than a part of a continuous historical trajectory of the Jewish people. Okay, this is the main criticism, the separation of Israeli sociology from Jewish history. It's very prominent and present in many studies on Jews from Muslim countries. Now, when preparing for this lecture, I wanted to double check, assess our updated, this notion remains today in public discourse worldwide, not just in Israel. So to do so, I just Googled the term Mizrahim, and this is what, the first images, the set of images revealed a strikingly consistent pattern reinforcing the binary perspective that I mentioned, and basically how the story is stripped of nuances to serve competing political agendas. And I'll explain. Mizrahim are often depicted as symbols of non-Western cultural revival, positions within Israel Western elite structure, or as figures whose resistance is necessarily aligned with Palestinian causes, because primarily both groups are portrayed as underprivileged Easterners that were marginalized or, of course, victimized by European Zionism. Alternatively, from a more pro-Zionist perspective, as you can see here, Mizrahim are often framed as evidence of Israel's non-Western nature, strategically contrasting with Israel's contemporary global image as white colonialist entity. Other interpretations emphasize Mizrahim or Mizrahi persecution by Arab and Muslim societies, countries, serving two main points. First, to reinforce their inclusion within the Jewish national project, aligning with European narratives of Jewish persecution from Eastern Europe. And second, to highlight the hypocrisy, according to those narratives, that eventually portraying Jews solely as oppressors of Muslims and Arab, while overlooking those historical instances in which Mizrahim or Jews from Arab countries themselves faced minority oppressions under Muslim elites. Now, these narratives have clearly shaped and continue to shape Mizrahi perceptions of Mizrahim, self-identity among Mizrahim. They often present a very rigid and binary portrayal of what Mizrahim mean. And in those cases, as I'd like to argue and show today, Mizrahim are repeatedly framed as the other social structure or entity to Israel's culture, Israel's Western culture, rather than an essential part of its multifaceted, highly hybrid and hybridizing identity. From this perspective, the identity is also conceived as rigid and often depicted through polarizing labels such as post-liberals, traditionalist, irrationally nationalist, things that we tend to hear about Mizrahim sometimes in popularized narratives, sometimes just Arab Jews without explaining what it means, meaning that they have an Arab identity without considering their own narratives about their identity. And in addition, they are frequently portrayed as passive players with little agency, historical role in shaping their own migration and integration into Israeli society. Broadly, they're depicted as population manipulated by stronger forces rather than acting on their own. And since I'm approaching this from a historical perspective, I want to take the next few minutes to highlight how deeply rooted these notions are in early debates about the integration and integration of Jewish migrants from Muslim countries from the 50s, or actually from 1948, into the 21st century. And this will also provide an opportunity to explore the broader historical context of this group in Israel. So, and later I'll challenge these perspectives by examining overlooked historical cases in each era or decade that I described, okay? So, in the early years of the Zionist project of Israel's founding, actually, and roughly until the 1970s, the dominant Zionist meta-narrative perpetuated the idea that the new Jewish state rescued Jewish populations from hostile, this is their perception, Muslim environment by bringing them to Israel. Okay? This narrative was tied to the idea that for these Jews specifically, homecoming from the exile to the land of Israel after 2,000 years of religious and messianic longing could only be materialized through the intervention of European Zionism. And this widespread national account, back then in the 50s, implemented that any continuous expression of affinity toward Muslim majority countries, Islamic cultures, Eastern cultures in Israel comprised of a double paradox. It was not just exilic reminder that was supposed to be, to disappear with the return of Jews to their homeland, according to the Zionist narrative, but moreover, there were reminders of a pre-modern culture that obviously did not, benefit the immigrants. They needed to modernize. This is not just an Israeli perspective, just for you to contextualize, to be sure. It was through to the French melting pot strategy and narratives, to the American perception of the true American, of integration into American society in the 50s, in many other places, including from Australia to Latin America. And until the 1970s, such so-called reminders, as I mentioned, were often attributed by most social scientists in Israel and beyond to temporary gaps stemming from the lagging process of modernization, the slow process of modernization, because they came from a traditional society. So they had like this labor pain of integrating into the Western world. Now, from the 70s onwards, a more nuanced criticism or critique emerged when scholars began to reassess the true nature of this ethos of the ingathering of the exiles to Israel, or of Jewish solidarity in shaping migration policies, migration decisions. And some scholars, such as Devorah Cohen, they were just part of the establishment, they weren't going against it, you have to understand. They exposed the harsh realities of the so-called homecoming, where inadequate resources often made living conditions so difficult that immigrants, according to their documentation, even consider returning to their places of origin, because they say, well, this is not what we had expected, we have to move on. And relatedly, some scholars also focused on the involuntary push factors and the lack of alternatives for those immigrants, challenging the dominant narratives of the epic return, the voluntary epic return to Israel. Others like Moshe Shaked and Shlomo Deshen, should be the other way around anyway. So others like Moshe Shaked and Shlomo Deshen emphasized the cultural alienation that many immigrants experience in the Jewish state, and the fact that they continue to develop their pre-migration traditions even in Israel. But all this still did not change or challenge the idea that Mizrahi Jews were eventually an integral part of the national Jewish project. In the 1980s, a different critical approach began to prominently challenge all the above altogether. According to this account, not just that the Jewish national project had never been the likely choice of the vast majority of Mizrahi Jews, who in fact sought integration into the MENA, Middle East, North African homelands, rather than Israel, but moreover that they were intentionally manipulated by Western hegemonies in Israel. And the European-dominated Zionist project, which was described as part of the broader colonial project, served to uproot them from their historical native environments where they coexisted with Muslims for 2 millennia. And they did so for the purpose of populating the young state of Israel and recruiting soldiers and so on and so forth. I'm sure this narrative is familiar enough. Within this context, the term Arab Jews was coined by some scholars, Ela Shochat most prominently, with the purpose of highlighting the shared destiny of both Arab Palestinians and MENA Jews, Mizrahi Jews, and portraying their displacement as a brutal uprooting by the foreign European Zionism. This perspective paved the path or the way for really a tremendous amount of works, academic, popularized books that continue to follow this line of thinking, both among Jewish and non-Jewish scholars, shaping the mainstream critical discourse on the intersection of Zionism, colonialism, and Mizrahi identity to this day. In the 90s, a shift occurred, right? Another shift occurred in this specific scholarship. People don't realize that the term Arab Jews is very, nuanced, and it has multiple perceptions and interpretations. So another shift occurred with the so-called hybrid turn in post-colonial studies, which began to challenge this rigid dichotomies between East and West. And in this context, the term Arab Jews underwent a critical reinterpretation when scholars like Yehuda Shenav argued that Arab Jews in Israel are inherently hybrid because they have to de-Arabize themselves to become Mizrahim, actually, to get rid of the Arabic, the historical Arabic component of their identity in order for them to, integrate into the Israeli society. That's why they're, sticking on, or, insisting of being Arab Jews, not just Arabs. Okay, and this is the hybridization he is describing. In the new millennia, scholars have expanded the discourse, this specific discourse, introducing new concepts such as Itmazrechut, becoming Mizrahi, Ishteknezut, becoming Ashkenazi, acting white in the Israeli context, if you want, and basically highlights how Mizrahi communities have negotiated and created their multifaceted histories over the centuries. I don't have time to, to fully explore the breadth of this scholarship. It's not just one scholarship. It's full of nuances. People discuss it from various perspectives, but I just need to mention that there are many cases that makes us think few, let's say, aspects of the way Mizrahi identity has been addressed. First of all, the active role of Jews from Muslim countries in shaping the multi-ethnic Israeli society. This is something that still needs to be considered more seriously. And second, to challenge the traditional East-West dichotomies that often define both popular and scholarly narratives about Jews from Muslim countries. And in what follows, I will go decade by decade, as I mentioned, or era by era, to show how untold stories, actually, from the very first decade of Israel's existence, basically reshaped, or may reshape, the narrative of migration and integration of Mizrahim in Israel. So let's start with the first decade. During this specific period, the so-called Great Aliyah, Aliyah Gdolah, the great wave of Jewish migration to Israel, Israel's Jewish population nearly, actually more than doubled, I don't know why I wrote nearly, more than doubled itself in just 3 years. This is an extraordinary and unprecedented phenomena in the history of migration. If you take the numbers of people entering Israel on a daily basis, they were actually higher than those entering Ellis Island during the era of mass immigration to the United States at the time. So it's very significant. Now, as mentioned, the common narrative suggests that Middle East and North African Jews were actively rescued by the state of Israel, even as they became a financial burden on this system, Israel system. People went to a great length to rescue them because they wanted to integrate them into Israeli society, even though they sometimes were racialized, they were marginalized for their ethnic background, but still Israel went, even risking the lives of its soldiers to, as it perceived, rescue those Jews from hostile environments. Now, very few studies are dedicated to exploring how these immigrants actually proactively contributed to Israel's establishment or to its resilience in the region at the time, such as in the case of Mizrahi diplomacy, which is really an underexplored topic. So one of the most significant communities, overlooked Jewish communities during this wave of migration was of, you want to take a guess? We know about Moroccan Jews, Iraqi Jews, Yemeni Jews, Iranian Jews, who was a bit underexplored, even though they were quite significant demographically. Yeah, because I talked to you earlier, so it's not. Okay, so from 1948 to 1951, about 34,237 Turkish Jews migrated to Israel, and they accounted for about 5% of all immigrants to Israel from 1948 to 52. 5%, and over 10% of all Jewish migrants from Asia and Africa, okay? Including those who came from Central Asia. And their presence was especially notable in the first 2 years, they comprised 31,000 out of 123,000, or around 25% of the Jewish migrants from Asia and Africa at the time. Okay, a quarter of them in the two early years of Israel. Why was this demography so important for understanding the resilience and development of Israel from a Mizrahi perspective? At the time, the so-called Western Jews, as I showed you here, based in countries, that recognize Israel's existence, de jure, and also de facto, obviously, rarely chose to migrate to Israel. They advocated for Israel from afar, in most cases, or in many cases, but they never immigrated. Jews from most Muslim countries did immigrate to Israel, but by contrast, they came from countries that were deemed enemy countries. So there were no chance of, working in the diplomatic arena here for them. Unlike both groups, the Turkish Jews who came from a Muslim country, they came from a country that was among the first countries in the world, not just the Muslim world, to grant full diplomatic recognition to Israel. And, that was against the backdrop of Turkey's pro-Western orientation in the 40s, and the encouragement of the United States that basically pushed both countries to establish diplomatic relation already in the beginning of 1949. Okay, despite Turkey's conflicting interest in the Arab world, obviously. And in this context, the immigration of almost half of the Jewish population in Turkey over the course of just 2 years, 48, 49, made their mass migration to Israel crucial for shaping Israel's diplomacy. And in the early years of statehood, I need to be very brief here because the material is really outstanding, and I can share with you more if you want later, but I'll be very brief. So in the early years of the state, Turkish Jewish immigrants in Israel maintained a vibrant Ladino, Judeo-Spanish press in Israel itself, which preserved actually their pre-migration heritage, because already in the Ottoman Empire they published in Ladino, and it perpetuated interest of those communities in both countries. For example, they reported all kind of news coming from Turkey, reproduced them in the Ladino press, reading their original reports in the Turkish press. They did the same thing for the Israeli press at the time, Ma'ariv, Haaretz, all kind of newspapers. One example is the ethnic press, periodical called Adelante, already in 1948, reproduced reports from the Turkish Chamber of Commerce, which proudly indicated that Israel has become one of Turkey's 5 largest export markets. That was in the 50s, in 1950. Again, the examples are numerous, and they all show how integration of many Jews into Israel did not run counter to maintaining ties with former homelands. Quite the contrary. As I show in a recent study I conducted with my colleague Tamir Carcassonne from Martin Luther University in Halle in Germany, football, as you can see here, played a unique role in this cultural diplomacy. The football situation in Israel was very poor, still is. In Turkey, it was way better. And they were so proud about it that they really, lobbied for, promoting, collaborations and inviting teams. So most Ladino newspapers in Israel, such as La Verdad, La Voz de Jerusalem, regularly reported on matches in both Israel and Turkey. A notable event was the 1950 visit of Fenerbahce, one of Turkey's most prestigious football club, to Israel. The team played 4 matches, including a game against Hapoel Tel Aviv, and the person responsible for this visit was Shabtai Dinar. Shabtai Dinar was a Turkish Jew who headed the Turkish department in Israel's foreign ministry, and he helped organize the visit, and he understood the significance not just of the visit itself, but of publicizing it. So he made sure that it would be broadcasted in Turkish and in Arabic on, Kol Israel, on the Israeli Broadcast Association, to maximize publicity and particularly, reach to the area, so people would know that there are cultural exchange between the countries. In the eyes of Turkish Jewish leaders, the presence of both flags on the at the football match extended beyond sport. It was a strategic display of Turkish Jewish role in cultural diplomacy, as I mentioned, as well as the ability to improve the international status of Israeli football. Beyond sport diplomacy, Turkish Jews also expressed loyalty to Turkey, exemplified by the planting of national Jewish fund cacao forest in Ataturk's honor in 1948. In their press, they expressed admiration for both Ben-Gurion and Ataturk, and this strategy was later mirrored by another significant communities that established ties, whose countries established ties with Israel, which is, the next one is Egypt. Egyptian Jews. They developed the notion that the deep understanding of both Israeli and Egyptian society can play a pivotal role in mediating peace efforts. And after Camp David Accords in 1978, they established an association, immigrant association, called Egypt-Israel Friendship, which showcases on its website and YouTube channel till now the event that they basically initiated and helped organize. I won't show this clip. If you want, I can send you the link later. It features all kind of conversations and public lectures from Egyptian ambassadors to Israel, from the leaders of this community, how they helped organize all kind of cultural events in Tel Aviv and in Egypt itself. Similarly, Moroccan Jews have also historically positioned themselves as cultural and political intermediaries, but we'll get to it later. So these instances altogether underscore that Mizrahi migration was not solely about assimilation or denial of the background or resistance to Israel. Rather, these communities often leverage the transnational networks and connections between both homelands or dual identities to redefine integration within the Israeli state and actively contribute to its diplomatic development. Now let's move to a more joyful example, music. So today, how many of you are familiar with this specific development, but non-Western sounding music in Israel dominates Israel mainstream culture, reflecting diverse genre and languages, including even Arabic. This is one of the most striking examples, what you see here behind me. It's an example of Valerie Hamati. I don't know if you ever heard about. She's an Israeli Arab singer who rose to fame on a TV show called The Next Star to the Eurovision, Israel songs selection show, which basically picks their Israel's representative to this international contest. And Hamati's Arabic performance really gained widespread public support, even in the post-October era. Okay, it was highlighted, the evolution and reception of Arabic music, despite obviously some criticism, some very severe criticism coming from right groups. Let me show you this clip very briefly. Let's see if it's going to work here. it's their perspective, okay? But I want you to take a look at it because it has some information that can help us understand my point.
It will be my Israel is apartheid state if I am in this show and singing in Hebrew and Arabic, and all the people give me a huge, huge hug. I am Valerie Hamati. I am 25 years old. I'm Christian Arab Israeli from Jaffa.
You are right now on the biggest television show in Israel, the equivalent of like an American Idol.
The rising star that determines Israel's representative to the Eurovision Song Contest.
And you are adored by Israelis. Why do you want to represent Israel?
I am Israeli, as every Israeli citizen here. And also, I want to show Europe which people are here in Israel. There are not only Jewish people here, many, many nations and religions. I don't know if they know that we live here together. Online, it's the minority of the people that makes it look like everyone hates everyone, and the majority of people are silent, and they just want peace, and we love each other, and we respect each other.
Because after October 7th, we needed to hear Arabic again in a beautiful context, in an artful context. And you did that. How did that feel for you?
I feel really blessed to do it. I have the pleasure to do music and art, to sing in my two tongue languages, and to connect between people. It will be my pleasure to explain to all Europe what is Israel.
Valerie Hamati.
Okay, you got the idea, right? So, just a minute, sorry. This is why I want to skip the other videos, because okay. So, very briefly, Mizrahi Jewish artists have successfully also performed in Arab countries, in the Muslim world. Sarit Haddad, Omer Adam, there are some, additional examples. Sometimes without really considering the Jewish identity. Neta El Kayam is one of my most favorite, examples. She's a Moroccan Israeli. She identifies as Moroccan Israeli in this specific order. And Tzion Golan, of course, Aywa. There are many other, examples, but specifically Neta El Kayam, she has, say again? Ofra Chaza, that's but she didn't perform in the Muslim world. I'm talking about, not international scholars, singers, but people who go to Arab countries, sometimes the countries from which their parents immigrated to Israel. So Neta El Kayam is a wonderful example. She performs in Morocco, and she's accepted, not by everyone. Okay, let's not be too rosy, but she's accepted by enough Moroccans of a younger generation who like her music, and they don't really pay too much attention to the fact that she's Jewish Israeli, and she identifies as a Moroccan Israeli. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. On a completely different vein, earlier genre blending bands in Israel, like Ethnics, the Israelis of my generation would immediately recall all kind of high school memories. Ethnics, Tipex, really reshaped Israeli pop culture. Ethnics was founded in the 80s. Fused rock, pop, Mizrahi music sounds from development towns where many immigrants from Muslim countries resided, and they really brought Middle Eastern influences into the mainstream of Israel. Now, this date back to the 60s, when mainstream Israeli radio truly, largely rejected this kind of music, let alone Arabic. Non-Jewish performers were out of the questions. And radio editors feared basically that it would clash with the state-sanctioned vision of the authentic Sabra, the Israeli culture, which ironically was dominated mostly by Soviet-inspired folk songs introduced by early Eastern European immigrants to the country. Now, David Ben-Gurion, I don't know if you know about this specific episode, he feared that foreign influences in music, whether Arabic or Western, would eventually undermine the value of the emerging national identity. So he even did not approve the performance of the Beatles in Israel. You don't agree with me? So I'll be happy to. It wasn't Ben-Gurion. Who was it? Okay. Thank you for the correction. But still, they did not perform in Israel because someone in the establishment did not like it. Now, okay, fine. The criticism is accepted. Despite this resistance, migrants from Muslim lands to Israel produced, and this is the significant aspect here, the significant issue I want to raise, produced an alternative Israeli pop culture, gradually building a dedicated audience in underground clubs. In the 60s, cities like Ramle, Jaffa, even Beersheba, where many Mizrahi immigrants were located, became vibrant centers for such alternative music fusion. Young Mizrahi musicians in these places pioneered the dynamic hybrid sound that blended rock, electric guitar, rock and roll, and traditional Middle Eastern melodies. This is something that is very nicely shown by a study by Amos Noe in an article called When Mizrahim Were Modern, the modern model, or Moderna. In a surprising twist, Mizrahi immigrants often drew from Western-influenced colonial musical traditions that they nostalgically yearned, going back to the places of origin, right? We have multiple examples like Chavib Amsika, Laila Morad, all kind of performers that performed chansons and performed, Western music in Muslim countries. And this is also something that beyond the traditional Arabic music, or influences also were part of the soundscape and the memories of those immigrants. So they brought it with them to Israel. It's not that other immigrants did not bring it, but they also, this is part of the fusion I'm discussing here. Now, moreover, and this is another incident or another manifestation, this is the phenomena of Greek music, Musica Yevanit, which Oded Erez, a scholar who studied this specific genre, called Greek washing in Israel, in the Israeli music. It refers to the process by which Greek music was embraced as a more socially accepted alternative to Arabic music in the 60s and 70s, despite the fact that both genres shared deep Ottoman and Mediterranean influence, both Arabic music and Greek music. They came from the same environment, from the Ottoman Empire. Now, or later on, the countries that were built on the, replaced the Ottoman Empire. Now, artists like Arisan, a Greek-born musician, not Jewish by the way, became a household name in Israel at the time when he played with his bouzouki, all kind of performers that became really significant in Israel soundtrack. And was obviously also embraced by the working class Mizrahim in Israel. Let me play just a bit here because I want to get a good grasp of the specific okay, yeah, okay. It's from Israeli TV. Sigal. This is Hebrew, not Greek.
חלמתי וחלמתי מול קרני השחר את לבבי הסחתי אין אני מאז את לי סיגל
And then
חמדתי
and then iconic singers like Arik Einstein performed something that really told the Zionist immigration story, echoing this specific music. I'm talking about Shir HaShayara, the convoy song by Arik Einstein. This is from the 80s, actually. Take a look at the, can you see the subtitles? Okay, enough. So now let's turn to the 1970s and early 80s, an era that really marked a turning point in Middle East and North African Jewish political activism and electoral, patterns on shifts. So this period saw the rise of the Israeli Black Panthers, inspired by their American counterparts who protested systematic discrimination, of course, economic inequality, and even police brutality at the time. Mizrahi activism was traditionally analyzed within a comparative national framework as a domestic ethnic conflict within Israel, which echoes a much broader global post-colonial racial struggle for justice. However, this framing overlooks the crucial role of, and this is my contribution here, on MENA Jewish diaspora communities outside of Israel, who were really, looking at this specific development as a chance for global Jewish solidarity, and I'll explain. When about 70% of the Jews from the Muslim world immigrated to Israel, the remaining 30% by that time were just about 20 to 30%, established new communities worldwide in basically the Western world. Okay, Canada, France, which became a very significant, even though it's the center of Europe, it became a very significant hub for North African immigrants, Jewish immigrants. Now, Canada, obviously, as you know, parts of Latin America, and other parts, even Australia and the United States, obviously. Now, very briefly, in February 1973, 280 representatives from 70 Middle East and North African and Sephardi communities across the United States gathered together in New York to do something very significant. They created the American Sephardi Federation, which still exists today. The same year, the Federation of Sephardi Jews in Latin America, FESELA, Federación Sefardí Latinoamericano, was established in Lima, in Peru, and further strengthened the global ties. The same year, similar local organizations were established in Canada, as you can see here on the slide, in France, Australia, Spain, Switzerland, and many other places. Now, the fact that these organizations were founded simultaneously in the 70s against the backdrop of Israel's Black Panther resistance is no coincidence, because they emerged in response to the event in Israel at the time when, as you probably know, there was increased global solidarity within the Jewish world toward marginalized Jewries in distress, they were called, as in the example of Soviet Jews and the support that came from American Jews toward human rights. And obviously also the support for Israel after the 1973 war. So the shared goal of those organizations was to support marginalized Mizrahim as a way of showcasing or developing their solidarity with Israel's ethnic problems. They saw themselves as responsible to help Israel solve this specific issue as part of their Zionist mission. And this is something that is, occasionally overlooked when we look at the hierarchies just by, through this East-West divisions within Israel rather than throughout the global Jewish diaspora. This development ties into another major shift in the 1970s, the political swing, the 1977 election that marked a turning point in Mizrahi voting patterns for Mizrahi voters. They traditionally aligned with the left, overwhelmingly supporting the Labour Party, the Mapai Party, and they secured Menachem Begin's, the head of the Likud, victory because they decided to support him during that specific election. What are the key explanations for this specific shift? So when you look at the scholarship, many sociologists say this was a protest vote. They wanted to, like a revenge vote. Okay, they wanted to pay the Labour Party to pay for the treatment of Mizrahim during the early years of the state, so they wanted to go with Menachem Begin, even though he was an Ashkenazi Jew. He came from Poland, but still they followed him. Some say that Mizrahim were manipulated into this voting pattern. They support right-wing parties even when policies did not, the policies of these parties did not align with the economic relief. And they voted against their interest. There is another scholar, Nissim Mizrahi, who challenged these views, arguing the Mizrahim voted based on collective identities and search for belonging rather than economic self-interest. But this shift eventually paved the way for Mizrahi voting patterns, including the rise of Shas to power in 1980s. This party were built on Mizrahi voters, Sephardi voters, while offering an alternative rooted in Sephardi religious cultural identity. Now, while the Mizrahi political shift is often seen as an act of resistance or manipulation, it was also a tool for diaspora Sephardi leaders to influence Israeli politics from afar. And one of the prime examples I can show you here, as a brief example, is the Swiss-based Sudan-born businessman Nissim Gaon, who supported the very first religious Mizrahi party in Israel, founded in 1982. It was called TAMI, Noa Mesoratet L'Israel, before Shas. Now, in the 1980s and 1990s, another remarkable shift occurred in Mizrahi mobility or socioeconomic mobility. Take a look at the figures. A study by Uri Cohen and Nissim Leon show that between this year of the swing of the shift in the Israeli political system, 1977, and 20 years later, 79, the representation in the bureaucracy, in bureaucratic and administrative elite grew from 6% to 25%. This aligns with their interest, increasing access to academic education at the time. And it's a tribute to the so-called, as you can see here, college revolution in Israel, which led to a surge in academic colleges that expanded access for those who were not admitted entry into Israeli universities. So it was quite significant for Mizrahim. It was an intentional, policy by the government. During this period, also some businesses ownership emerged as a key driver for Mizrahi economic mobility, providing an alternative route to middle-class status, traditional elite institutions. Many Mizrahi entrepreneurs established family-run businesses, which can be seen in Israel in many of the so-called development towns, but well beyond, even in the so-called new middle-class town, where Mizrahim are significant majority of the population. Ashdod, Beersheba, Rishon LeZion, all kind of very big cities in Israel. This is based on a study by Ephraim Yaar from '86, which shows how they leveraged community networks and adapted to Israel's evolving market, basically experiencing mobility at the time. By the 2000, a significant Mizrahi middle class had emerged in the urban centers, as I mentioned, and it really influenced the landscape of Israel. At the turn of the millennium, public discourses on Mizrahi inclusion and historical injustice gained another momentum, partially due to the growing electoral influence, as I mentioned. In 1979, then the Labour Party chairman, Ehud Barak, issued a public apology, I don't know if you remember this, to Mizrahi Jews in Israel for past discrimination by the Labour Party, acknowledging the disparities and cultural biases at the time. He said, "אני מבקש סליחה." Okay. Then in 2016, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed that a DNA test traced part of his family lineage to Sephardi Jews. Okay? What am I getting at? This development reflects a broader shift in Israel where Mizrahi culture and contributions are increasingly recognized, sometimes for political purposes and as a tool for polarization. As discussed earlier, there is this very popular book by Avishai Ben Chaim about Israel HaRishona and Israel HaShniya, first Israel and second Israel. Many Mizrahi people don't connect to this. Many Ashkenazi people obviously don't connect to it. Many mixed people don't connect to it. But it's a very, very significant book because people talk about it. And it makes a difference. So this development, in fact, enables new kind of manifestations and phenomena in Israel, including something more positive like bridging of Israeli culture with the Arab world, specifically after the Abrahamic Accord. And in the 21st century, I want to focus specifically on Moroccan Israelis, which are the most fascinating case. Moroccan Israelis have reclaimed and celebrated their heritage through strong and unique transnational ties. This is evident in, for instance, naming of streets, but specifically a public square in Ashdod after the Moroccan king. Okay, they also lobbied for a stamp, with his image on, to be issued by Israel. I don't think there is another instance of a country other than Morocco that would issue a stamp with the Moroccan king, other than Israel. Think about it. Obviously not Algeria. So their influence extended even to, as I mentioned, Israeli state symbols, but also in December 1920, when Israel and Morocco announced the normalization based on the Abrahamic Accord, in Yerucham, which is a town with significant Moroccan population, very symbolic for its history of, development, like the fact that Mizrahi Jews were concentrated there during early years of the state, symbolically associated and attached to the history of discrimination. They decided to express their joy by displaying Moroccan flags and images of the Moroccan king, and a notable ceremony took place at the local municipality with the mayor, who is a Moroccan descent. She invited Rabbi Yitzhak Shalev to lead a prayer for the Moroccan king's well-being in the municipality, accompanied by a community, by an audience and a community leader and long-time resident. Now, in the aftermath of the October 7th attack, initiatives by Israeli of Moroccan descent thought to portray Moroccan descendant victims and hostages in Israel as part of the broader Moroccan diaspora, aiming to garner sympathy in the Arab world, specifically in Morocco. which they did not eventually, but they tried to. Yet, despite significant cultural and political advancement, Mizrahi identity in Israel remains linked to stereotypes and underclass status and marginalization. Studies on the third generation, which is quite interesting and haven't been conducted until very recently, show that ethnic gaps in higher education and earning between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim persist across generation. This is a study by Sigal Nagar from Sapir College. Sorry. Even in light of Mizrahi mobility, as I showed, there is a mobility. There are much more, educated. Mizrahi academics in Israel, but still there is a gap. Now, the data reveals clearer disparities between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim. We still see that this gap, in fact, becomes smaller over a generation, as you can see on the table. The most interesting trend emerges with the mixed category. This trend suggests that while ethnic gaps persist, they are becoming more complex and making it increasingly difficult to draw rigid distinctions between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim in Israel today, because there are a growing number of mixed people in the country. Not as much as we would assume, but there is quite a number or portion. In summary, Mizrahi culture has long been an integral part of Israeli history and society, not merely as a reaction to Western dominance, but also as a fundamental element that has allowed diverse communities to connect and merge. Despite ongoing structural marginalization, Mizrahi culture is increasingly visible in identity formation, public spheres, national symbols, music, culture, etc. It has become a crucial force shaping Israeli identity, politics, economy, and social factors. And this story also highlights the dynamic nature of Mizrahi identity and the proactive role of Mizrahim in shaping the history of Israel. Thank you for your attention.
So, thank you, Aviad. Thank you so much. We have time for a Q&A session. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Rachel Friedberg. I'm in the economics department here. So you spoke about how Mizrahim were perceived by the Ashkenazi Zionist elite. Can you speak at all to how they were perceived by the people in the country where they left? So I read recently that a third of Baghdad was Jewish 100 years ago. I read it, it could be wrong.
Yes.
But in any case, we know that community existed for, millennia, hundreds of years at least, right? So were they, always perceived as, they're like real Baghdadis and then there are these Jewish ones? Or is that sort of a narrative created by Zionism to say, really, Jews around the world were never part of the lands where they lived. They all, who they belong to is the other Jews that they'll find themselves with in Israel.
Yeah, interesting question. Do you want to take other questions or?
Up to you.
Okay. Let's take some more questions. I'll just put that.
I think this gentleman had his
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mateen. I'm an undergraduate. I'm a student of Omri's. I took his class on Mizrahi Jews last semester. Best class I've taken at Brown. I just had a it might be a little bit specific, but I'm interested in wondering, I'm a Persian Jew. My family immigrated from Iran after the Iranian Revolution. And I in studies, I read about Moshe Katsav, and I'm wondering how his presidency and his subsequent conviction may have tainted the Mizrahi image, or maybe more specifically the Iranian image in Israel.
It didn't turn out well, yeah. That's a short answer. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aviad. I'm Liaz Mahanna. I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies and also in Complet in History here at Brown. I have a question about the period that directly precedes the period that you discuss, which is the period of depending on the term, there's three different E words that you could use, either emigration, expulsion, or exodus, that bring these Jews to Israel. And I realize this is a politically loaded question that there's been a lot of debate on, including among many Israeli historians. And I'm curious to know what the state of the art is today. Like how, it used to be discussed in terms of push factors and pull factors, and the role of Zionist emissaries in places like Iraq and Egypt and Yemen in cultivating, in preparing the ground for an exodus. There are some Israeli historians who say that they actively promoted it, that the governments in places like Iraq and Yemen and Egypt were trying to prevent Jews from leaving. So I'm curious to know what is the current state of the debate on that question?
Yeah. Maybe I'll address it's too many questions for me to remember. Okay, so I'll start with the last one, which is really interesting. For ages, the Mizrahi communities were treated as, the migration was treated from a top-down perspective, as people who had very little, way to control their migration, and eventually they had to, adjust and come to Israel. Now, the state of the art focuses on network analysis, the way those people now were part of a broader migration movement. They were basically moving along with additional population. Omri's work is one of the, I think, the most innovative ones on how people can move from a specific place based on minority networks. This is something that is completely changing the field and the perspectives on why people move from one place to the other. And it shatters the Zionist narrative from an unexpected perspective that is not just like engaging in a zero-sum game dynamics in a way that, it's not that they were, kicked out by Muslims or manipulated by the state of Israel or, became, victims of the situation in the region. Basically, this specific narrative goes well beyond this to look at the immigrant perspective and agency in the process, which I think is the most significant, step towards a more healthy perspective on migration. I hope more works will be conducted on this. Now, stereotypes, the question about, Moshe Katsav. When you have stereotypes and you have, bad reputation, some people would just look for, those specific cases where they could say, you see, I told you. You see, this is, some people would say it. Some people won't, there are all kind of, approaches to this. I think it didn't do good. The first, Sephardi president was having so many jet lag moments today. I'm sorry. No, it's Yitzhak Navon. Yeah, I know. He was a Sephardi, Samechtet, a Sephardi person. He identified as Sephardi, was so proud about his Sephardi identity. He never identified as Mizrahi or anything like that. But eventually, when the first, president came from something that is not completely identified as this, Sephardi community, it was almost like, a big farce, right? It wasn't what most Mizrahim who waited for Mizrahi president to appear expected to happen. So obviously nobody sees it as a positive, development. Now about Jewish communities being part of the broader societies. So, until the 19th century, and this is not just my take on Mizrahi history or Middle Eastern history, but on broader histories of the Jewish world, most Jews were kind of self-ghettoized or ghettoized by governments. They were not really part of the broader societies. When you look at it, many had their own, communities, separate organizations that were engaged in transregional networks of trust, of, finance between places. They obviously integrated in society in linguistic terms and, in terms of, market or labor, obviously, but because they needed to, earn their living. But culturally, it wasn't what we see developing in the late 19th century and early 20th century. The Baghdadi case is quite extraordinary and exceptional. Why? Because it did not undergo tremendous colonialism as other parts of the Middle East and North African region, but they did mobilize very well into the middle class using Arabic. This is the reason why many scholars in Middle East studies, those who do Middle Eastern Jewish studies, tend to focus on the Baghdadi or the Iraqi case to showcase the thesis about Arabs as Jews. Jews are Jewish, Judeo-Arab, all kind of. But if you go to Morocco, most Moroccan Jews would say, no, our modernization wasn't taking place in Arabic, it was taking place in French, right? Muslim would say the same thing, right, in Morocco. And this is why we have to be sure that we pay attention to nuances and cross-regional differences between places in the Middle East and North Africa to understand the mobilization of Jewish communities at the time. So my answer would be that yes, the Baghdadi case is very, very significant and interesting, and it's made a difference even on Israeli society because Iraqi Jews immigrated as a whole, almost as a whole, 95% of them in one instant between 1949 and 1951, 52. But then again, you have the Algerian case, for instance, which represent like almost a contrary mirror of the Iraqi case because 95% of them migrated to France to the extent that they were so integrated into French culture that they were, first of all, granted citizenship already in the place of origin, unlike Muslims, but also that the Zionist establishment went freaked out or went so, sorry for the language, went so, so furious about it that they held a public trial against Algerian jury in 1963, held by public trial, not like a real, it wasn't a felony, like a public trial. The idea was to showcase that we need to make sure that the middle class in the Muslim world would not lose track of what's going on in Israel, and they will not go and modernize in alternative path. They will make sure that Israel is in their mind, and that was part of the accusation. That the one, what the line of defense was in the trial itself? They said, "What do you want from us? Look at American Jews. They're not even, considering coming here. So what do you want? Why are you accusing us?" So this just to, I know I went a bit off, but just to give you perspective of the nuances. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Aviad, for a fascinating talk. I just want to raise 3 points that came to my mind while you were talking. The first one is about the music. Now, you said they came from Eastern Europe. The early composers who came from Eastern Europe were looking for Oriental motives. I mean, Oriental, and there were Orientalists, no doubt, but this נחום נרדי, ידידיה אגמון, ימין ושמאל רק חול וחול, שדמתי, they are supposed to be kind of Israeli Middle Eastern music.
You say it's supposed to.
Yes.
It was so far off from the actual music. That
it was supposed to.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't promote East European music. They wanted to create something new, different from the music of the diaspora. So they didn't turn a blind eye on the Middle Eastern heritage of the Jews, not at all, but they didn't understand it. They created what they thought is Middle Eastern.
Absolutely, but still, I'm sorry I'm cutting you off because I got the point. As a kid growing up in the 80s, I remember my father enjoying songs like Liv, Levu, Agas Vegam Tapuach, all kind of translated songs that were really iconic in the Israeli soundscape. Now, this is something, I mean, I get your point, but it wasn't I mean, even though it's like what happened with food, actually, the culinary tradition. They
I must
wanted to
answer, לבלבו הגס וגם תפוח is a Russian song.
Yeah.
Okay, so my parents didn't come from Morocco, they come from somewhere else, and they were furious. They are broadcasting on the radio the music of Stalin? So, you know, there are many ways to look at it.
Yeah, of course.
Now, the other thing that I want to say three things. The other thing is that the emergence of Tami, which I'm very pleased that you mentioned, is one of the factors that started the survival of Yiddish.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it actually started the discourse of identities in Israel, not only of the Mizrahi, but also of the Ashkenazi. I won't elaborate on it.
Interesting.
And the third thing that I want to say, which that strengthens what you said from an aspect that you didn't expect, you know that in 1954 came out שש כנפיים לאחד by חנוך בר-טוב. It was the first a novel that described the life of immigrants in Israel. Which immigrants? From Eastern Europe. Okay? 3 years earlier had come out another novel with the same prestigious press, an excellent novel which is called Hamabara. Ma'abara was a transit camp for immigrants. Yeah. From everywhere they came, most of them went to Ma'abarot. Written by Shimon Balas, an Iraqi Jew, who later was a professor of Arabic literature. Have you heard about him? Do you know? And nobody knows him. And the difference between the two novels in terms of contents, the second one, the Bar-Tov one, ends with the birth of the new baby. The first one starts with the death of a new baby.
Yeah. Thank you for the observations. Yeah. We'll talk more about the Mizrahi music, yeah. Because I have some thoughts. Yeah. I said style, right? I said Russian folk song style. Yeah.
Hi.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I want to ask a question that actually piggybacks on some of the others that were asked, but focused now on Morocco. We were in Morocco a couple of years, pretty recently, and where we tried to focus on Jewish culture in Morocco. And a couple of fascinating things that I'm sure you know, that Moroccan tour guides are being trained in Jewish culture, Jewish history, blah, blah, blah. Some of them are learning Hebrew, like all kinds of interesting, tons of Israeli tourists. But one of the things I was what a beautiful story they were telling about the wonderful integration of the Jews into Morocco. But then why would such a large group of them leave so suddenly? And in a way, like, I like the story that they were telling better than maybe whatever was around it. But and I meant to, the next time I spoke to someone who was more expert in this than I, to ask for a reaction to that. I kept asking that question, well, why would so many leave so quickly if that's the story? And the answers were not really satisfying.
Yeah, so, once I asked a Moroccan Jew, why did so many Jews leave? And he said, there were 260,000 Moroccan Jews. There were 260,000 reasons for why Moroccan Jews left Morocco. And this is not a joke. It actually connects with your excellent question about, how we understand migration and explore it. Of course, there were like a really tremendous, very momentous, immigration from Morocco. But the first person who leaves in 1948 his story is completely different in terms of its context and the sense of, is migration than the person who comes in the 80s last. The history of migration, Moroccan migration, Jewish Moroccan migration, is quite like stretched. It's longer than the one of Iraqi Jews, Yemeni Jews, and many other communities who came in like one big wave of migration. So, and the reason I'm saying it is because, the people who join later, they engage in a completely different dynamic of migration decision making, because they already have families in Morocco. The community is dwindling to an extent that they need to, even if they're rabbis, they don't have communities to lead. They can't to go to the synagogue, and they have so they have to go to Israel. But the irony is that many of them stay last because they want to, lead the community. So all kind of things. Now, I'll address the first point you made. Why are they telling this story in the way they're telling it? Because first of all, it paints Morocco in very rosy colors. It's a very tolerant monarchy, and people, they want to, showcase that they're, different than many other places in the Arab world. This is their narrative, this is their perspective. It's also a Moroccan Jewish narrative, the Moroccan uniqueness. We are, welcoming Jews. We want Jews to come back. It's part of our, heritage. But it's also part of the dynamic with American Jewish communities and all kind of financiers and organizations that really, put their, money into it, and it's part of the, the story. So we have to be critical about why the story is being told. And at the same time, I agree with you that it's wonderful that it's being told that way, because it gives us some hope. Even though it's not, it's not academic, it's good for, for the dynamics in the region.
Hi, Aviad.
Hi.
I'm Shirley Farber. I do research on Jews from Lebanon, so I wanted you to speak a little bit about the small Lebanese Jewish community in Israel.
How should I
And
address
especially
this?
with the language, because the ones that I talk, they try to blend in the Israeli community. They don't want to speak Arabic anymore. Meanwhile, the ones that went to Brazil, which is my family, Arabic was so important. The Arab music, the Arab culture, everything. We stay Lebanese more than anything in the diaspora.
Yeah. So first of all, the one thing that comes to my mind is that Lebanon, the Lebanese community, the Beirut community, was one of the only communities in the region that whose population increased after 1948. Okay, increased. Why? Because of internal migration. These are the dynamics that we're overlooking when we look at it only from the Zionist perspective. Jews immigrating from Syria to Lebanon instead of coming to Israel because the way was blocked to Israel. So that's very important to realize. The Lebanese community expanded after 1948. Now, why did they, speak Arabic in Lebanon but shied away from it in Israel? I think the answer is obvious. I mean, in Lebanon, Arabic is part of an immigrant community. It's part of the, blending culture. It's different. It's treated completely different. In Israel, if you speak Arabic, you're part of the, enemy. I know I'm going to very traditional narratives about it, but sometimes, they have a point. It's true. If you speak Arabic on the street in Israel and you're not Arabic, it bears something. It bears a meaning, social meaning. Yeah.
Is this working? Yeah. Take the prerogative of, in terms of a very big question that you won't have time to really answer, but there's kind of an irony. On the one hand, the Black Panthers saw their situation as being similar to that of the blacks in America, and they chose. I'm sure they chose it to be very provocative. So there's a kind of an irony because there is so much discourse in America in which the paradigm of the civil rights movement is being applied to the Mizrahim. And in the maybe less than 2 minutes that we have left, I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that paradigm and about the question of the impact that ultimately has on the way people think about Israel, talk about Israel, and the ways that so the ways that it really does break down ultimately. I'm not asking you so much about analyzing what goes on in outside in terms of, but just from your perspective, because it's interesting because they, on one hand, they saw themselves, but they didn't know a lot about America, what was going on when they chose that. So,
So, I mean, I'm sure they were exposed to, this very, worldwide discourse about it's what's going on, and they decided to, name themselves the Black Panthers, obviously, but their intentions were completely different. That's the point. Now, when we talk about the Black Panthers in the American context, in many other contexts, we think about race. I want to say something about race in the Mizrahi context, right? Because, well, let's take the most extreme case of, racialization in the Israeli context, Ethiopian Jews. They were, basically, excluded from the Jewish nation until the 70s because they were not considered Jews by many rabbis, including the rabbis in Israel. But in the 70s, the Sephardi rabbi Ovadia Yosef decided to include them. And ever thereafter, they not just, included, Israel went to a great length, sent its, elite combat units to, as they believed, rescue them, bring them to Israel, rescuing, basically risking the lives of its soldiers to come to Israel, not to bring them to Israel. Now, what's the point here? The point is that, the religious and ethnic shared faith between many parts of the Jewish world is sometimes more important than race. And how can I further exemplify this? When many Russian immigrants came to Israel, people from the former Soviet Union came to Israel, they were also racialized, but not for being too black or for being with too light skin and blue eyes. They were considered to be sometimes not Jewish. I mean, suspiciously, they were not considered to be non-Jewish. And this is something that, again, shows something about the scope of race in the Israeli context. You will exclude one specific group for being too black, just as in many other places, but you can also exclude a group for being too white. You can exclude Mizrahim for being too traditional and unmodernized, or not exclude, but try to modernize them. But at the same time, you can say, no, we also need to keep an eye on those who are too modernized, because that might endanger the Jewish identity of the country. So we need to also make this is a unique situation, I think. I mean, I don't think it's unique just to Israel, but it's definitely distinctive and different than what we know about race and racial hierarchies and struggles in the American context. And that's the reason why the Black Panthers in the Israeli context did not really struggle or fight for in order to change the system. That wasn't their intention whatsoever. They wanted to integrate. There is this very memorable sentence by again, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. I'm still have some jet lags, but I should remember this. I'll check. One of the leaders of the Black Panthers, I think it was Saadia Marziano, who said, well, we want a bite of the cake or a piece of the cake, or there will be no cake. You see, but they want a piece of the cake. It's not that they don't want the cake at all. So, yeah. Yeah, of course not. No, that's one of the point I made in when I discussed those from afar, from abroad, who wanted to, basically suggest an alternative for the Mizrahi struggle. They said, no, the Pantherim didn't get it right. They're ruining it for everyone. We need to make sure that there is a Sephardi leadership that will modernize the state or make, create mobility opportunities for Mizrahim, not from not in the same way the Black Panthers are doing it. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Aviad.